morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're viewing from. This is Laura Thompson, your friendly, fabulous, feisty, fierce, and phenomenal CEO and creator of TAN TV, the African American Network, where we have a local feel with a global region. You're tuned into the coffee break, and guess who I ran into just a few minutes ago? I was drinking my coffee and minding my own business, taking a little break, planning to be here by myself, but my brother, Dr. Lawrence Scott, he is a professor at Texas A&M University at San Antonio.
Yes, ma'am.
Stop by because he has a little word for us today.
Yes, ma'am. Yes,
so how
ma'am.
you
Anything
doing?
for you? I'm loving the alliteration, the fabulous, fierce, all the F's. I love it. I love it.
I know. So Dr. Scott came in probably maybe about a year and a half ago.
Yes, ma'am. Yes,
to
ma'am.
talk about, African American studies curriculum being implemented in the high schools in the state of Texas before it got voted in.
Right.
It got voted in, and then something happened along the way. You know that song that says something happened along the way. Yesterday is all we had. Well,
Yes, ma'am.
he's here with an update on what's happening with the critical race theory in the state of Texas.
Yes, ma'am.
So before we get started with the interview, could you just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit of biographical information about yourself, who you are, what you do, why you do it?
Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. So my name is Lawrence Scott. I'm from right here in San Antonio, from Eastside San Antonio. And I've been blessed to, I've gone to schools here in SISD. I was blessed to come back and work for 17 years as a teacher, a counselor, a guidance counselor, an administrator, a curriculum writer for central office, and then for SISD. 17 years, and then I was able to go into the higher ed sector right there at Texas A&M San Antonio, where I teach educational leadership. I'm able to train the next cadre of principals that are going to be leading schools and communities. So it's such a blessing. And I don't take it lightly because nationally speaking, out of all the professors in America, less than 2% are black males. And so I go for tenure. So so keep us in prayer. But God has given me a mission and a mandate to again do the work of equity, the real work of equity, and what that looks like in the arena of education where I've been nestled. So if I may, a year ago we were here. I don't know if we celebrated too early, but Texas was the only state that had Mexican American and African American studies. And at the time, again, I was working under the tutelage and leadership of my state board member, Marisa Perez Diaz, who will be here momentarily, I'm sure. But I was working under her leadership, and we were able to assemble a national cadre of educational experts to help us, revise what Dallas ISD had already, Dallas ISD had operationalized an amazing curriculum, and we were able to revise and revisit and then come back and redo some of the curricula for African American studies. We're able to get it past the state board. Just to give you context, Mexican American studies took 6 years. African American studies to pass took 1 year.
Wow.
The blessing was, this is the blessing, they were both passed unanimously in the Texas State Board of Education. So what did that say? That told us that this is something that all of us need. Everyone benefits. What does the research say? The research shows when we talk about culturally relevant pedagogy or culturally sustaining pedagogy, the research shows when kids learn about themselves, when they see themselves reflected in the curricula, they tend to do better. Discipline rates go down. Graduation rates go up. The research, the perennial intergenerational research is clear. And so the state board knew that, and they acted accordingly.
Wow.
How did we get here? All right. 2018, around 2018, there was a gentleman, and everyone's calling him out now. His name is Christopher Rufo out of the Manhattan Institute. He decided, and he said, I repeat, in his, and I'm using the verbiage, in his Twitter feed, he says, I'm going to decodify and recodify a term, something, and he's looking for a term. He's like, well, culture relevant pedagogy, it's too nice, that's too agreeable. Critical race theory, that'll get people riled up, right, for election's sake. And so he used this term, and he says, and I'm going to put everything, the ills and everything that we're mad about under this umbrella. So we're talking diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're talking institutionalized systemic racism. We're talking about the baneful effects of slavery, all these things. Basically, he wanted to put it under critical race theory, which, again, critical race theory is a
made-up term. Right?
Yeah. It's something I didn't start using until I was working on my doctorate. It's something I use in graduate school as a theoretical framework. So if you're looking at, real quick, I'm sorry, but if you're looking at discipline issues, so you look at it like black boys are disproportionately put in punitive like discipline, like so ISS, OCI. I'm sorry, I'm using education terms, but in school suspension for the same infraction that their white counterparts would only get a phone call home, but black boys are being suspended. That's a disproportionality, right? So then you'll use critical race theory to look at why is there a racial situation, and there is, right? Teachers, 83% of American teachers are white female, so teachers see black boys and they're using their hands, high gesticulation, and they may be, energetic and demonstrative, but they're not angry at you, they're not upset, so why are you sending them to the office for missing a pencil? And then they just happen to respond with, a little more, a little more gesticulation. So that's what critical race theory would be used for, or our criminal justice system. Why are 1 and 3 put in the penal system? That's a critical race theory. It's not used when you're talking about slavery or when you're talking about the decimation of the indigenous or Japanese internment camps. That's not critical race theory for K-12.
Wow. So that's not. That doesn't sound like it's fair.
Yes, ma'am. So what he did, he came up with this term, and then you had Donald Trump, I don't know if I can name names on this show, but you had our 45 decided to do an executive order that he wanted to get rid of all DEI training, diversity, equity, including training, funding for it. And so he did it. He did the executive order. Now, our new president, of course, reversed it. But he did that. And then so you had senators, I don't want to name names, Ted Cruz and some other. You had senators using this term. A certain news station started using this term. And then now you have all these groups infiltrating board meetings, local board meetings, and parents infiltrating board meetings and telling everybody, this is critical race theory, and I don't want you teaching my child about racism and institutionalized racism, and they said that we're not talking about the exceptionalism of America. And then what we're telling people is somehow the issue is this, grappling with how are we going to discuss the disparities that exist, right? And I can give you the litany, the 1 in 3 of our blacks are going to jail. 3 to 4 times a black person, they get pulled over, they're 3 to 4 times likely to be pulled out the car. Unreasonable search and seizure, all these things. We can talk about housing. We can talk about the housing disparities. We can talk about the baneful effects of redlining. We could talk. So all these things are just simple conversations on why there's inequities and disparities that exist, and then what are we going to do about it? Wow. And that's the real issue.
So how does that relate to the critical race theory and how that came about? All of the things that you just pointed out.
Right. So now we've basically, like you said, he decodified and recodified. He basically retermed critical race theory. Like if you want to know about critical race theory, read Dr. Derek Bell, read Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw, read Dr. Richard Delgado. Like there's theorists that I'm not a critical race theorist. I've done critical race theory, but I'm not a theorist. But there's theorists that have a clean perspective. Basically what they did is they said, anytime we talk about inequities in race, then we're going to just put it under critical race theory, and then it's the boogeyman that we're going to use, and then that's going to keep school boards from allowing. Now they're taking out books out of the library. They're our African American Studies course is pretty much powerless because most of the stuff that we put in there, including the 1619 Project, can't be used.
Wow. So what can we do to reverse that?
Yes, ma'am. Glad you asked. And I know you have your state board member coming up momentarily, but continue to support your state board members, all right, in this effort, because they unanimously decided before their powers were usurped by the state legislature. And I know you've been a legislator. Before the powers were usurped, so no indictment of you, but before their powers were usurped by the state legislature, get informed. Get with your local school board and your state school board, because that's where your curriculum is going to come from. Get with your teachers, because those are the experts in the classroom. All right, get with your teachers and figure out how are we going to discuss? I know some districts are actually having parents sign curriculum agreements. So you actually get to look at the curricula and then you sign that you agree with that. So then we can move forward. I think schools, I used to be a former administrator. I think we need to get our PTAs and our clubs and our parental groups involved in the process. Only have a representative or something in the process to where parents can understand and know how curricula is developed, how curriculum is written, developed, how curriculum and instruction is actually used and taught, how it's assessed, evaluated, and then how it's revised. We have a revision in social studies coming up that I know Marisa, State Board member Marisa Perez will talk about, but how that process of revising and revisiting curricula looks like for the state of Texas.
Wow. So thank you for stopping by. We've got to have some more conversations about this when we have more time.
Yes, ma'am.
But you have been tuned into the first part of this conversation on TAN TV on the coffee break with Dr. Lauren Scott from Texas A&M University at San Antonio. And we've been talking about the critical race theory and what that means to education in the state of Texas.
Thank you, Laura, for having me. Thank you so
thank
much.
You. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're viewing from. This is Laura Thompson, your friendly, fabulous, feisty, fierce, and phenomenal CEO and creator of TAN TV, the African American Network, where we have a local feel with a global reach, and you're tuned into the coffee break. And guess who just walked in a few minutes ago? The fabulous, feisty, fierce, and she's a fighter. Marisa Perez. She is on the State Board of Education and represents District 3. How you doing, Marisa?
I am doing fantastic, Miss Laura, and I will say we're also fellow Scorpions.
Yes, we are. So we just both celebrated. She celebrated her birthday yesterday, maybe?
Saturday.
Yeah. And I celebrated mine a couple of weeks ago as well. So, these Scorpions are relentless. Marisa Perez has been relentless in fighting for education for Texas. And so we're super excited to hear about some of the things and some of her accomplishments and some of the things that she's still fighting for on behalf of education in the state of Texas. So before we get started with the interview, can you briefly tell me a little bit about yourself, where you're from, what you do, why you do it?
Yes, of course. So again, Marisa Perez Diaz. I was born and raised here in San Antonio, in the Woodlawn Lake area. I'm a product of public schools from kindergarten up until currently I'm working on my PhD, and I've been serving on the Texas State Board of Education since 2013, and have loved every minute of it, though it's not always been very easy. And I was brought to this work through a previous career in child welfare. So
Wow.
I worked as an advocate for young people who were experiencing adverse family situations. And so through my work with Child Protective Services, really saw the gap between one institution that served students and, for all intents and purposes, re-traumatized students.
Wow.
And the other institution, which was public education, where I also saw service and re-traumatization of students, and really felt like, because I understood one segment could be a voice in a different segment of the population, in a different sector of the work. And so that was my sort of introduction into public education, and then decided that my advocacy in child welfare needed to go further. And so I decided to step into public education, and was very blessed almost 9 years ago to have been elected by my constituents in District 3, and just have been proudly serving and doing my very best to advocate on the best for the best interest of all students across Texas. And when I say all students, I mean all students, not just a particular segment of the population.
Wow. And she's a fighter, and she's been fighting since the day that she's gotten into office. You've had some successes, some great successes. You fought for Latino curriculums to be included in the curriculums in the state of Texas, like not just in San Antonio, not just in District 3, but all over Texas. You were one of the main initiators for that particular project. And so, and then you came right behind that and and help support the African American Studies initiative. And so could you tell us a little bit about, how that came about, why you did it, and, how you won that?
Yeah, definitely. Well, it was definitely not easy. I'll say that. So once I was elected onto the board in 2013, a colleague of mine and I, who started that same year, looked at each other and were like, okay, well, we've made it on the board. Now what do we do? How do we make a positive impact? And so, one of the things that we took from our predecessors, Mary Helen Berlanga from the Valley,
Wow.
and Dr. Joe Bernal from here in San Antonio, the two of them were relentless fighters in trying to make sure that all of our histories were told, and all of our students in our classrooms across Texas were acknowledged, that their identities were represented, and that they felt like they were seen and heard. And so, carrying out their legacy, we decided that we were going to work really hard to try to bring those courses to fruition. And so I know that you had Dr. Lawrence Scott, who's a dear, dear friend, on talking about the work that it took to get Mexican American Studies passed. It was almost a 6-year battle from the beginning of having our preliminary conversations to actual approval and implementation of the course, and that in a state where over 52% of the student population identifies as Latino, the majority of which are Mexican American.
Wow.
And so much of the pushback we received then was because it was considered anti-patriotic rhetoric or divisive, and
Wow.
it just a lot of fear about what's unknown being taught to our students. And so we took a lot of our best practices and a lot of what not to do from that long process as we introduced African American Studies as a potential in 2019 when we started our conversations on AAS. And then in April of 2020, we're successful at passing African American Studies for students across the state. And right now we're currently working on an Asian American Studies course that we hope to be introducing as an innovative course here in mid-December for hopefully implementation in the fall of 2022. So there's a lot of really exciting work happening. It's just that unfortunately we have to fight some fear mongering that happens in not even just statewide discourse. It happens across the nation and trickles down into the work that we do.
Wow. Well, sometimes people say they're not going to go down without a fight. And when they have relentless fighters like you all have been, it's kind of like egg in the face, and, they got to fight back. But so some laws have been changed, or some things have been slowed down as a result of the state legislators being in session for this past session. So tell us about that.
So unfortunately, looking at my tenure on the board, this has probably been one of the most difficult legislative sessions to accept for public education, in the sense that there was really an attack on students' knowledge. I can't think of any other way of posing that. There was an attack on civics education and community-based learning, and all of that was sort of guised as critical race theory. So I know that you spoke with Dr. Scott about this, and sort of this weaponization of a collegiate framework. Right, something that's used not even at the undergrad level, something, a concept that's introduced typically at the graduate level, and in most spaces in legal conversations, not even around education. I was introduced to critical race theory in my PhD program in a social justice focused education program, and so it takes a special kind of program to even introduce this concept. And so to suggest that CRT exists in K-12 education is really misrepresentation of what's happening. And what I've seen has been truly a conflation of what diversity, equity, and inclusion is versus and true history versus critical race theory, which is again a concept that sort of just has our individuals challenge their own thinking about the pervasiveness of racism and discrimination in our institutions, which absolutely exists.
Wow.
But so I share all of that because we had House Bill 3979, which was, a bill that came out of the House that would have really negatively impacted how we specifically teach social studies. And so the danger with this bill, I mean, there were a lot of really negative things about this bill, but the most alarming to me as a state board of education member was really this sort of overstep in terms of the role of the SBOE versus the role of the legislature. And so the legislature through this bill was attempting to essentially dictate what should go into the curriculum, and that isn't the role of the state legislature,
Right.
as you,
Wow.
Laura, know.
Wow.
That's the role of the SBOE. And so...
Because you're elected officials as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And so SB 3, so Senate Bill 3, was sort of the companion bill out of the Senate side, which now supersedes House Bill 3979. And the difficult part about this particular bill is that not only does it impact social studies, it impacts all of our core content areas. So what we're looking at is really a challenge in terms of how students learn about civics, how they engage with their community, whether they can engage with their community, and then whether or not educators should fear having conversations about current events and helping students navigate those very real issues that they experience outside of the classroom that they bring to the classroom with questions.
Wow. So that was a pure power play.
Oh, absolutely.
That's all that was a pure power play, because I have the power to do it. I'm going to do it, but it's negatively impacting the ability for students to learn, about their true history and their true culture.
Absolutely.
So we've run out of time, but we're going to have you back on some other platforms to talk about this more. I think it's a very important initiative and topic, and we need to shed light on it. So thank you so much for hanging out with me on the coffee break for a little bit. This is Laura Thompson. You tuned into the coffee break on TAN TV, the African American Network, where we have a local feel with the global reach. And thank you, Marissa Perez Diaz, for stopping by.